Hello and welcome to Whirlwinds of Danger. That's just a working title for a game I'm working on. Real-time tactics games about ships and missiles and ships shooting missiles at one another. Right now I have spawned in as the entire Danish Navy's frigate force. We have all our frigates sailing in formation here in the Norwegian Sea. If we zoom out a bit, we can see we are near the island of Jan Mayen, and here we see our target, a fishing trawler, probably a Norwegian fishing trawler since we are in Norwegian territorial waters. It has foolishly turned on its AIS, its automatic identification system. Now, we can't have fishing trawlers fishing, depleting the fish stocks. How can we? And fishing trawlers normally hunt in packs, so I bet there are more fishing trawlers around this one which haven't turned on their automatic identification system, so we can't see them. Let's shoot some missiles at this fishing trawler. We have 104 anti-ship missiles in our formation in total, so let's send 8 Harpoon anti-ship cruise missiles downrange. Just quickly pause the game so we can see the missiles launching from our ships. I pressed the button to fire, and now there we go. We have launched 1 missile, 2 missiles, 3 missiles from this ship, and a bunch of missiles from the other some other ships. Now if we zoom out a bit and turn up time warp so time moves a bit faster, we can see the missiles turn towards the target slowly. There we go, the missiles are flying right now with their radar off and flying low at an altitude of just 10 meters to avoid radar detection by the fishing trawlers. Now let's see. We are getting close. Soon the missiles will turn on their radar. There we go. They've turned on their radar, and they spotted another track, another unknown contact moving at the same speed as the fishing trawlers. I bet that's another fishing trawler. Yeah, it's a fishing trawler. Let's see what happens. There we go. The mission was a success. We successfully eliminated a fishing trawler. Okay, so what you just saw was a first look at a real-time strategy game I'm working on developing, and as you can see, I've just added anti-ship cruise missiles to the game, and in this video I would like to show you how I did that. Now, the first thing we need to add missiles to the game is to simulate their physics. That is, look at all the forces working on the missile and figure out how it moves over time. And an extra fun challenge for me is that I'm going to have to do that all from scratch in C++, because I'm not using any game engine, no Godot, no Unity, no Unreal. I'm literally doing everything from scratch in C++, including developing the game. That's really not as bad as it sounds. C++ is an easy and relatively high level language, and making a physics simulation or a physics engine is also pretty easy. All the math is fairly well understood and well documented, and to boot, I have a master's degree in physics, so the math is positively easy, or well known for me at least. Now, how are we going to do this physics engine? Newton's laws of motion gave us a bunch of differential equations for how the missile's position and velocity changes based on the total forces applied on the missile, and solving differential equations on a computer is positively easy. There are a bunch of algorithms which can do that, and the one I've chosen to use is Runge-Kutta 4, the 4-step Runge-Kutta algorithm. And look, I'm not going to go into details with why or how it works. Just ask any decent AI agent that is not Krog, and they will give you a reasonable explanation. But suffice it to say that the Runge-Kutta algorithm works in steps. Every step it looks at where the missile is, and this plot, by the way, is it's the output from a simulation of a missile flying viewed from the side. Every point is a step in the algorithm, and every step the algorithm looks at what is the current state of the missile, and what is the derivative of the current state of the missile, and based on that it does a bit of math looking forward into slightly alternate versions of the future where the missile is in slightly different locations, and based on 4 such looks into the future, it calculates where the missile will most likely be at the end of the next step, or at the beginning of the next step, the end of this step. And suffice it to say, it works. The Runge-Kutta algorithm works, but one problem is that my state is a little complicated. The state of the missile is a little complicated. It's not just the position and the velocity of the missile, it's also the orientation of the missile in 3D space. It's essentially the roll pits and yaw angles of the missile, but I'm not using roll pits yaw to store the orientation. There are various mathematical reasons that's not a good idea. Instead, I'm using a quaternion to store the 3D orientation of the missile. A quaternion, by the way, is a 4-dimensional mathematical construct. And to get the equation of motion for the orientation, I need to consider the inertia tensor of the missile. But, in my case, it's just a 3D matrix, and again, it's fairly easy for computers to store and work with 3D matrices, and I can sort of pretend the missile is a perfect cylinder, and the inertia tensor of a cylinder is well known. And based on the inertia tensor, I can, and based on the torques working on the missile, that is forces working at defined locations on the missile, I can calculate how the 3D orientation of the missile changes over time. And after tallying up all the forces, your gravity, your lift, your thrust, your drag, your lift-induced drag for the wings of the missile, and your parasitic drag on the wings of the missile, I can just plug all that into the RK4 algorithm, and this is the result I get. This is the path the missile takes. Now, the red part of the line is when the missile's solid rocket motor booster is active. It boosts the missile away from the launching ship at launch, and after a few seconds it runs out of fuel, and now the missile is flying only on its I was about to say solid rocket motor, no, I meant the jet engine, which provides much less thrust. And as you can see, the missile glides to 1 kilometer of height, then it pitches down and crashes into the ocean. You know what, this actually looks sort of like the path a ballistic missile would take. I know it's not quite a ballistic missile because it has a built-in motor, but the path looks sort of like a ballistic missile. I want a path which looks more like a cruise missile. That is, I want something which, yes, flies to a high altitude, but then goes back down to sea level and starts sea skimming at a very low altitude to avoid radar detection, and glides like a normal airplane using its wings until it reaches the target or runs out of fuel. And to do that, we are going to need to be able to control the pitch of the missile. and yeah, we are going to need to add some flight controls, and the way we are going to do this is we are going to use the horizontal the horizontal stabilizer of the missile. Yeah, I know, looking at this naval strike missile, it doesn't have a traditional tail assembly like an airplane, but I pretend it has a normal airplane like tail assembly because that's easier for me to simulate. And essentially we're going to use the horizontal stabilizer to apply some sort of upwards or downwards force at the very end of the missile, and that will cause the missile to either pitch up if we force the end of the missile down, or if we force the end of the missile up, it's going to cause the missile to pitch down. And how are we going to control this? Well, one simple solution you might think would work is something like this. Here I've just taken the altitude error, how many meters are we above or below our target altitude, and translated that into a climb angle, a pitch angle. If we are too high, we pitch down. If we are too low, we pitch up. That's what that minus sign in front is doing. Now, this doesn't work. This is what the flight path of the missile looks like now. Whoops, I think I'm in the way of the graph. There we go. Oh, thanks, OBS. The missile glides to 50 meters or thereabouts. Then it pitches down aggressively, too aggressively, and it smacks into the ocean. Okay, it's doing better than before actually. It came 8 kilometers from the starting location. Do note that the z-axis here and the x-axis don't have equal scale. But the missile kind of doesn't stop pitching down, or well, it does stop pitching down, but it stops pitching down way too late, because by the point it reaches its target altitude, it has a very high negative climb rate, and just the fact that it pitches up isn't enough. It pitches up way too slowly and it smacks into the water. We are going to need to take into account the existing climb rate of the missile to decide when we actually want to pitch up. And well, we could do that like this. Let me move myself out of the way again. There we go. This is essentially a PD controller, which is a variation of a PID, proportional integration derivative controller. We have a proportionality term where we just have the altitude error and some sort of proportionality constant multiplied. That was what we had before, but now we also have the derivative term, which takes the derivative of the altitude error, which is the climb rate, and multiplies that with a factor and adds that to the desired pitch angle. Now, this does take a lot of tuning to get right. We need to tune these it's difficult to point. These parameters here, the KP and the KD parameters, if we have them set wrong, you might get a flight profile which looks like this. The missile climbs to altitude, pitches down, and overshoots its target altitude. I guess technically undershoots it, and then it pitches up and overshoots its target altitude, and pitches down and overshoots again and overshoots again, and we get a very bumpy ride. That's not exactly what I want, but if you tune the parameters just right, you might get a flight which looks like this. Beautiful. Again, note that the X and the Z axis don't have the same scale. Don't have the same scale. The missile climbs to 250 meters height, and then it dives to 10 meters and glides for 120 kilometers until it runs out of fuel and crashes at just 10 meters altitude. This is exactly what I want, except not really. It's impressive that this is working, but it is far too slow to run. The simulation takes 80 milliseconds to simulate the entire flight of the missile, which is actually unacceptably slow in my opinion. I mean, it sounds good. The missile is in the air for 600 seconds in total 10 minutes, and I simulated that in just 80 milliseconds. That sounds good, and I guess for a single missile that's good, but I'm not going to work with single missiles in game. I'm going to have maybe hundreds of missiles in game in air at the same time, and the computer is going to need to do a lot of other things to keep my game running, like it's going to consider radar tracking, it's going to consider the physics simulation of the ship, which is a lot more advanced than the physics simulation of the missile. So I'm not satisfied with the performance. We're going to have to simplify this simulation a lot before I can use it in a game. And how are we going to do that? Well, first we are going to forget about 3D orientation. Whoopsie. I wanted to move myself. Stop it, OBS. I wanted to move myself. Down here seems fine. We are going to forget about 3D orientation. I'm actually going to simulate a missile which just flies at a constant launch angle of when it's launched, and then after a timer expires, it automatically, instantly snaps horizontal and continues flying horizontal for the entire duration of the flight until it runs out of fuel and crashes. The only of the angles I'm going to simulate in the simulation is actually the yaw, the rotation from side to side of the missile, not the pitch, not the roll. That means I don't have to worry about the quaternions, and that also means I don't have to worry about my 3D inertia tensor. That, by the way, was why I didn't go into a huge amount of detail with how that works, because we aren't actually going to use it in the simulation. Also, instead of pitching up and down to climb and descend, the missile flight computer is actually now allowed to vary the amount of lift produced by the wings, and it can use that to control the altitude of the missile within some limits. And at the same time, I'm going to simplify the aerodynamic simulation a lot. I'm still going to keep the lift force. I kind of need that to stay airborne, but the parasitic drag and the induced drag, I'll just ignore that and tune the missile's body drag to compensate for these ignored drag forces. And I'm also going to skip the stall check, the stall condition check for the wings of the missile. I just say the missile shouldn't stall in normal use, so there's no reason to check that condition. Well, all these simplifications make the simulation run faster, a lot faster, as in 20 times faster. Before it took 80 milliseconds to simulate the entire path of the missile. Now it takes 4 milliseconds. And the flight doesn't look quite the same as it used to. The missile still climbs to altitude, it doesn't climb quite as high, and it still dives to 10 meters, and it actually glides a tiny little bit further. I don't know what funky business is going on here at the very end, and then it runs out of fuel and crashes. It doesn't look the same, and it certainly isn't entirely physically accurate anymore, but it's fast, and it gets the basic cruise missile flight path right. And you know what, this is good enough to use in a game. So this is the missile simulation I'm going to put into my game. But there are some more things we need to consider. We need to consider how the missile maneuvers. Like what if the ship launching it is launching it in the wrong direction and it needs to turn around to get to the target, and how exactly do missiles target individual ships? How do they know that they are going to hit exactly that moving target, which might be 70 nautical miles away when they are launched? Well, I am going to have to solve those problems, and I'm going to show you that after the jump cut. Okay, welcome back to the scene just after the jump cut. And as I may or may not have remembered to say before the jump cut, we are now going to discuss missile turning. Like, first thing first, what happens if the missile launches in exactly the wrong direction? As you saw in the clip from the game, and right here, right now, the launchers for the Harpoon missiles aboard the Danish frigates are fixed. So sometimes the missile might literally get launched in the opposite direction from the target. Thankfully, this is pretty easy to fix. We can just make the missile try to point its nose towards the target, where we could do like this. Here we calculate the target heading and find the difference in angle between our target heading and our actual heading. The bit of floating point, the F mod here and the if statements just make sure that we actually have the shortest angle between two angles. As the comment explains, if one angle is 1 degree and the other is 359 degrees, then the true difference between them is 2 degrees, or minus 2 degrees. That's just what that math does, and we can apply a turn proportional to the angle difference. And this works very well if the target is far away. Here I have a top-down view of missiles being fired in all kinds of crazy directions, all headed towards the same target, and they all turn and point themselves towards the target very nicely. But what if the target is not far away? Like what if we don't know where the target is exactly when we launch the missile? And that's not a what if, that is actually what it is. We don't know exactly where the target is when we launch the missile, because the target, which is a ship, might have moved since we launched the missile, and maybe it turns out there were more targets than we knew about when we launched the missiles. Or maybe the initial click the player made to launch the missiles was slightly off target to begin with. Well, if we just try to point ourselves at the target, you get a path which looks like this. This is again a top-down view. The missile is being launched here on the left, and turns towards the target, but when the craft turns green, it's within radar range of the target, and it turns out the target was in a different location than expected, and it rapidly tries to turn towards the target, but it misses the target and almost goes into some kind of orbit around the target before running out of fuel and crashing. That's not great. We miss by several thousand meters. But you know what? Real missiles have this problem too. How do they deal with this terminal navigation problem? Well, they use something called proportional navigation, which is thankfully described on Wikipedia, and Wikipedia even has this nice formula here for the required acceleration. It depends on the line of sight rotation of the target. So the basic idea with proportional navigation is that you want to keep the target steady in your view. If this is your target, you want to stop it from moving around in your view. You want it to keep steady in your view, slowly growing bigger and bigger as it gets closer and closer. Then you know you are going to hit the target. And this right here is the required acceleration to hit the target, the required acceleration perpendicular to your line of travel to eliminate the line of sight rotation. It's some proportionality constant n times the line of sight rotation, that's the time derivative of the line of sight angle from us to the target, times the closing velocity v. And well, we can calculate this, but how does that help us? The Wikipedia article doesn't tell us that. I mean, just knowing that we need to accelerate this much in that direction doesn't help us actually do it. So, out of option and just wanting to get it working, I tried asking an AI and it hallucinated up this formula here. It just said that just set your rotation rate to the time derivative of the line of sight angle to the target times 3. Well, I tried a bunch of different proportionality constant and 3 was the best one. Now, I honestly don't know where this formula comes from. It might as well be an AI hallucination as far as I know, but it kind of works, kind of almost works. Like this is what the path taken by the missile seen from above looks like. This looks very good. We launch, we make some course adjustments towards where we think the target is, but it turns out the target isn't actually there. But when we detect the target, we make a rapid turn and almost hit it. We miss it by 100 to 50 meters depending on the setup. But a miss is a miss. This is not going to hit a ship. Well, it might hit an oil tanker or a supercarrier, but in general this is not going to hit the target. So the AI hallucination didn't work. I actually also tried to implement my own solution, and here it is. Okay, I can see my head is slightly in the way. Let's move that out of the way. Or first I calculate the force required to make the turn from the actual Wikipedia formula. Then I try to calculate what angle relative to our velocity we need to turn to, so that our engines can provide the required thrust, so our engine can provide the force we need. And it is a little better than the AI suggestion. As in, I ran 128 experiment setups with slightly different targets and some slight differences in how the missiles were launched. And in the case using the AI hallucination, I hit 33 out of 128 times. Using this, I hit 35 out of 128 times. That's technically better, but not a lot better. Yeah, it's still pretty bad. So, what are we to do? What is the problem? And come to think about this, how do real missiles do this? Well, I should have read the Wikipedia article more carefully. It actually states that the missiles try to achieve this using their control surfaces, not their engine. They don't turn their engine to get the required force. They either they bank to turn their wings, so their wings provide a slight perpendicular component in their turn, or they skid to turn, meaning that they yaw sharply to the side, and the friction hitting their body provides the required force to make the turn. It's not the engine which does the turning, because the engine isn't actually very powerful for these cruise missiles. And inspired by that, I made this horrible botched solution. I just say, well, okay, we apply another perpendicular force in in the right direction, to the right relative to our velocity, and it's going to be as powerful as the force we need, or at the very least as powerful as our lift allows. Essentially, this is sort of simulating a missile banking to a turn, although this is not particularly physically accurate, this formula here. It might not be physically accurate though, but it is accurate. This actually hits 127 out of 128 times, and hits actually means getting within 1 meter of the target. And this finally brings the development journey to an end. Finally, I have a simulation for a missile I can actually bring into my game, which can actually be launched and hit a target 70 nautical miles away. So this brings us full circle around back to the game. I've now added the cruise missiles to my naval real-time tactics game. And where do I go from here? Well, first things first, I would like to add some missile defenses. I mean, shooting up fishing boats is all fun and games, but maybe it would be more fun if we had a target which could, actually fight back. So it would definitely be worth adding something like anti-air missiles, so the ships I shoot at, they can try to shoot down my incoming missiles, or radar spoofing and jamming and decoys like chaff would be interesting to have in the game as well. So maybe my missiles weren't 100% accurate all the time. And of course guns and CVs to try to intercept my missiles. And while we are talking about this, we should have different ways of attacking as well. Cruise missiles are all nice, but what about ballistic missiles, or torpedoes, or missiles which drop torpedoes into the water like the Russian Silex, or drones? I'm thinking a lot of drones. I'm thinking a modern naval warfare game should be drones with a side of missiles, not missiles with a side of drones. Well, I'm definitely extremely early in the development phase for this game, but at least one of the major hurdles have been overcome. That's adding missiles to this game, and maybe I'll make more videos when I add more stuff to the game. But I think that is all I have for now. You can leave now. I said you can leave now. Okay, I need to turn off the recording for you to leave. Well, I guess I will just do that then, if you aren't leaving on your own.